story today comes from the Gospel of Luke. Each of the four Gospels looks at the story of Jesus and tells it in a slightly different way. Luke looks at the Gospel and focuses on those who are oppressed, outcast, people who aren't welcome, the underdogs. And in the previous chapter, Jesus had been sitting eating dinner with one of the leaders of the Pharisees. When we come to this part of the story, he's no longer eating with the Pharisees, but a crowd has gathered. And the people who are starting to gather around him are tax collectors, people who are the outcasts, people who are not usually accepted at the table of the Pharisees. And the Pharisees look at the people who are gathering, and they say, look who he's gathering around him. People that are tax collectors, why is he letting these people come around him? This is not what a religious person does. You may recall that in those times it was important to remain pure in order to enter the temple. You didn't want to go into God's sight being impure or less than holy. So the Pharisees surrounded themselves with people who were pure both morally and ritually. And these people were most likely neither. So they were not exactly people who were welcome. To a Pharisee, these people would be like having a white living room and a couple of toddlers covered in ketchup coming into your presence. Enough to give anybody a heart attack. They were not welcome. So he looks at them and he says, he tries to explain to them why he would allow these people. Why would you allow these ketchup-covered toddlers into your white living room? And he looks at them and he tells them a few parables. He tells them one about a sheep and a shepherd being lost. And if you lost a sheep, you would go look for it. If you had a coin, you would find it. And then he comes to this story. The story that's maybe very well known by many of you. The story of the prodigal son. And in this story, we have three main people. We have the oldest son, the prodigal son, and the searching father. And any of these people might be people that you could sympathize with in the story. Some of you may sympathize with the oldest son, the son that says, I've been sitting here working for how long? And you've never thrown a party for me, and now you're going to throw a party for him? There's a show I've been watching on Netflix called Kim's Convenience, and in the show on Netflix, there's two children. The oldest son dropped out of school, ran away from home, and didn't do things exactly the way his parents wanted them. The younger daughter went to college and went to school for photography. And the oldest daughter gets something published, one of her pictures that she had taken, published in a magazine. And she's trying to get some recognition from her mother. And the mother just kind of says, yeah, very nice. Did you hear your brother got his GED? Nothing she does was good enough. And that's kind of how the older brother feels. He feels like no matter what he does, it's just not good enough. I've been here all this time, and I've still not gotten any recognition. You may relate to the second brother, the prodigal son, the one that has screwed up and done something so bad he doesn't think that he's deserving of love anymore. Maybe you've done something in your life that you don't think that can be taken back, and you don't think you're worthy of forgiveness. Maybe it's something like a really bad financial mistake that could have driven you and your spouse apart. Maybe there was infidelity. Maybe there was some other situation that has driven a wedge between you, your loved one, your son, your daughter, your parents, and you just don't feel like you can get that approval back. Maybe you sympathize with the waiting father, the one who loves his children, and he has these 2 children, he has to raise them both. One of them is the perfect son, the one who's there for him, who's solid as a rock. And then he has this other son, the one who has to learn everything the hard way. And he's asking him for his inheritance. And he knows that if he gives him that money, he is just going to squander it, and it's just going to be gone. But he knows that he's not going to learn unless he does things the hard way. So he gives it to him and says, go ahead, do what you're going to do. There's grace in the Bible. This story points us to our Heavenly Father. And just like they were standing up here, one with the stick and one with the robe and the slippers, a lot of us have been raised with the idea that God was this stern Father, waiting for us to mess up, waiting to tell us exactly everything we did wrong, waiting to beat us, waiting to give us what it is we deserve. But there's also this loving Father, the loving Father who is there waiting for us, looking for us, searching for us, ready to forgive us, no matter how bad it is that we've messed up. I have a story of forgiveness of my own. There was one time, some of you may know that I used to drive the bus for schools. I drove for Portage Township schools for about 3 or 4 years, and I also drove the bus for Lake Station for a couple of years. And I like to consider myself a pretty good driver. However, that was not always the case. When I was 16, I got my first car. It was a Chevy Chevette, silver. I had all sorts of horrible bumper stickers all over it from Spencer's Gifts. And when I started driving it, when you were going 30, the doors were shaking. When you were going 40, the back door was shaking. It was a hatchback, and if you hit 60, you knew you were going to die. But I loved that car. And one day, my mom went on vacation with her boyfriend and left me in charge. And I took my sister to go see a movie. We went and saw Interview with a Vampire. And then I dropped her off at her friend's house on the way home, and I started making my way to my friend's house. Well, unfortunately, I may have rear-ended somebody on my way to my friend's house. And it may or may not have involved looking down to light my cigarette. And I may or may not have broken a bone in my hand because of that accident, because I only had one hand on the steering wheel. So my mom was in another state, and my car was totaled. That was first semester of senior year. Second semester of senior year, we had moved from Crown Point to Valparaiso, and that's a little bit of a drive. And my mom was a single mom, and she worked, and she did not have time to drive me to and from school in Crown Point. So my mother generously got me another car. I had that car maybe 2 months. When I was going out for a night with some of my friends, we were going to drive to Chicago to a coffee club called Extreme Bean. And one of the people I was supposed to pick up lived in Hobart, and he was kind of cheap. And he feigned that he did not know how to get to Valpo from Hobart. And so I made sure to look at the names of all the streets on the way so that he could not say that the next time. However, while looking at one of those street names, I hit a Ford Explorer head on. Luckily, the second car I got had been a nice, big, blue, very safe Chevy Celebrity, a late 80s model, which was nicely big as a boat. Luckily, I walked away with that with no broken bones, just a couple of bruises. But a good, healthy fear of my mother. I was so afraid to go home. I did not want to go home. I spent the night at my friend's house. I was thinking, what am I going to do? My mom is a single mom. This is our only, this was my only way to get to and from school. How am I going to finish school at Crown Point? This is the second semester of my senior year. My mom is going to kill me. And then I started, the reasoning started kicking in. Well, I do have a cousin that lives in Crown Point. Maybe I can live with her. Maybe she'll let me live with her if I offer to babysit. I could be a live-in nanny. That way, maybe I could stay. So I'm sitting on the couch the next day. My friends had dropped me off, and I'm waiting for my mom to come home. And it's the kind of silence where you can hear the clock ticking, the second hand, every moment. And I'm just waiting for my mom to come home. And I know that look that's going to be in her eyes, that line of fire, that you've seen in your own parents' eyes. So my mom walks in, and she looks at me on the couch, and she immediately puts two and two together and says, "You're here. I did not see your car outside. You got in another accident, didn't you?" And I honestly can't remember what I said, and I asked her, and she can't remember what we said either. All I know is that the fear that I was waiting for, the anger, the outbursts, they didn't happen. She gave me a hug, and she said, "I'm glad you're okay. The car can be replaced, but you can't." And that is the love that we get from God. No matter how bad we think we've messed up, no matter how much anger we're expecting, God is always willing to forgive us. He's willing to open his arms and hug us and say, "I'm glad you are okay. I love you. You're still my child." I would like to close with a prayer. Bow your heads with me, please. Lord, our efforts with faithfulness are fraught with failure, more often than we care to admit. Thank you that your love for us is never wasted. Please keep us rooted in your word, eating at your table, and praying by your Spirit, so that we may remember when we fail that we are part of your family, not because we deserve to be, but because you want us to be. Amen.